The smell hit me before my eyes even opened. Motor oil. Rust. The kind of cold that lives inside concrete and doesn't leave no matter how many blankets you pull over yourself. For half a second I thought I was 28 again, sleeping in my truck on a break at the plant in 1987. Then my hip cracked when I tried to shift, and I remembered. I was 63 years old. I was not in my truck. I was not in my house. I was lying on a folding cot above my son-in-law's garage in a town where I knew almost no one, and I had been lying there for 77 days. There was a keypad on the door at the bottom of the stairs, and I did not know the code. There was a phone in my pocket that no longer made calls. There was a bank account with my name on it that I could not log into. There was a bottle of blood pressure pills in the wastebasket because it had been empty for 16 days. And there was a photograph of my wife on the crate beside my cot, wrapped in an old sock, so the glass would not break if I knocked it over in the dark. I want you to hear me clearly before I tell you the rest. I am not a weak man. I raised 2 children by myself after cancer took their mother in 2009. I paid off my mortgage 12 years early. I kept the same truck running for 220,000 miles because I knew how to take care of what was mine. I coached Little League for 9 seasons. I am not the kind of man who ends up hidden in a room above someone else's garage counting the days. And yet the ceiling above me had a water stain shaped like a boot, and I had already counted it 411 times. If you have ever watched someone you love slip into a situation they cannot climb out of, and wondered how in God's name it could ever happen to a sensible person, stay with me. Because I am going to tell you exactly how it happened to me, step by step, signature by signature, small surrender by small surrender, and I am going to tell you the one thing that saved my life. Because someone finally made a phone call I was too proud to make myself. It started 14 months earlier with a phone call in March that sounded like love. My daughter Lisa called on a Tuesday afternoon. She had been married to Brandon for 6 years by then. I had never fully warmed to the man. He was the type who gave compliments that felt like small cuts and laughed at his own jokes a beat too early. But Lisa loved him, and Lisa was my daughter, so I shook his hand at barbecues and asked about his work and kept my mouth shut about the rest. Brandon sold financial products, insurance, annuities, investment packages. He was good at it the way a certain type of man is good at it, smooth, patient. Always seeming to listen when he was actually just waiting for the pause so he could steer you where he wanted. Lisa told me she was worried. I had mentioned once at Christmas that my hip was giving me trouble and that I had felt lightheaded coming down the stairs one morning. I had not meant it as an opening. I had meant it as the kind of thing a father says to his grown children so they know he is still a human being. But she had held on to it, and now Brandon had an idea. They had a big house in Granville, a finished room over the garage with its own bathroom. Why didn't I move in with them? Rent out my paid-off house in Maplewood for the extra income. Let Brandon manage everything from one place. He was good with finances. He would make sure I was comfortable. I told her I would think about it. That same week my son Marcus called from Portland. He called every Sunday and sometimes on Wednesdays, and this was a Wednesday. When I told him about Lisa's offer, he went quiet in that way he had, not hesitating, thinking. Then he said something I have replayed in my head 1,000 times since. He said, "Dad, you do not have to do that. You are not a burden to anyone. And if you do decide to move in with them, promise me one thing. Any financial arrangement goes through a lawyer that you choose yourself, not someone Brandon recommends, your own lawyer." I told him I would. I did not. That is the sentence I would carve into stone if I could. That is the whole story in 3 words. I did not. I moved in April. I rented my Maplewood house to a family that seemed decent. The rental income went into a joint account that Brandon helped me set up because it was easier that way, he said. More efficient. In July, my hip flared up and I needed a small surgery, and the doctor told me to rest for 6 weeks. Brandon slid a stack of papers across the kitchen table and said it would be simpler if he could pay my bills while I healed. Just a power of attorney. Nothing changes about what is yours, Victor. This just covers the bills while you are laid up. I signed. No lawyer, no second read. Just a man in pain who had spent 31 years trusting that people meant what they said. I want to explain that signature to you because I know how it sounds from the outside. I was not senile. I was not confused. I was a widower who had just had surgery and was living in his daughter's house, and was trying very hard not to make things awkward. I was a man who wanted to believe that this arrangement was what it looked like, and that wanting is the door that people like Brandon walk through. The first crack in the wall came in September. I asked Brandon about the rental income, where it was, how much had come in, whether he had kept records. He smiled that smile of his, patient, slightly condescending. And he said he had moved some things around for tax efficiency, and he would walk me through it when I was feeling better. I told him I was feeling fine. He told me I should rest. Something shifted in me that afternoon. Not panic, not yet, just a cold, clean awareness. Like the first morning in October when the air changes and you know summer is over and it is not coming back. The next day I asked Lisa the same question. She looked at me the way a stranger might look at a difficult customer. She said she trusted Brandon with their finances completely. She said she did not understand why I was making things difficult. I told her I was not making things difficult. I was asking about my own money. She stood up and walked out of the room. I went upstairs to the garage room and opened the folder where I kept my financial documents. The most recent statement was 3 months old. I tried to log into my online banking. The password had been changed. The recovery email was no longer mine. I asked Brandon that night. He said he had updated everything for security after a phishing attempt on the bank. He said he would reset my access that weekend. That weekend came and went, then another one, then the phone. I had cracked the screen and Brandon had offered to take care of it. When he handed it back, it had a new SIM card in it and no service. I called the carrier from the house phone and they told me the account holder had reduced the line. The account holder was Brandon. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because I know what it sounds like when I say it out loud now, but you have to understand how these things happen when you are inside of them. Each thing on its own is explainable. Each thing has a reason attached to it. Security, efficiency, recovery, rest. It is only when you line them up on a piece of paper that you see the shape of what is actually being done to you. So I got a piece of paper. I found a small notebook in the drawer of the metal shelving unit and I started writing everything down. Every conversation, every date, every number I could still remember. Every promise Brandon had made and the exact words he had used. I hid the notebook inside the box spring of my cot in a gap I had cut with the tip of my truck key. It sounds dramatic to write it now. It did not feel dramatic at the time. It felt like the only rational thing left to do. By November, I was no longer welcome in the main house after 8 in the evening. Brandon had not said it in those words. What he said one night when I came inside for a glass of water was that Lisa needed quiet for her anxiety and that my moving around was disturbing her. I told him I had been thirsty. He told me there was a mini fridge in the garage room and he would make sure it was stocked. The next morning, the keypad code on the garage door had been changed. Nobody told me the new one. I am going to tell you what those weeks were like, and I am going to tell you plainly because I think the plain version is the version that matters. I had one space heater that tripped the breaker if I ran it on high. I ate what Lisa brought up on a tray once a day, usually around noon. Some days the tray did not come. I had no internet. I had no phone service. I had my notebook. I had Carol's photograph. I had a library book I had borrowed 3 months earlier that I had already read twice. My blood pressure medication ran out in early December. I had refills waiting at the Walgreens in Maplewood, but I needed a ride, and I needed my insurance card, both of which required asking Brandon. He said he would handle it. He did not. My head started to ache in a way that lasted for days at a time, and here is what I need you to understand. Because this is the question I still get in messages from strangers. Why did I not just leave? Why did I not pull the manual release on the garage door and walk out? I could have. I want to be clear about that. The door had a keypad, but it had a manual release too. I could have pulled it any hour of any night. I did not because I was 63 years old. In deteriorating health, with no access to my own money, in a town where I knew almost no one, in the middle of an Ohio winter with no working phone. With a truck registered to an old address whose keys I had not seen in 2 months. And underneath all of that was something worse. I kept thinking Lisa would come around. She was my daughter. I kept thinking that underneath whatever Brandon had convinced her of, she still knew who I was. I kept thinking that the little girl I had watched grow up. The one I had driven to soccer practice in the mornings and helped with her college applications at the kitchen table and danced with at her wedding. She was still in there somewhere. And if I just waited long enough, she would come find me. That was the part that broke me, not Brandon. Brandon was just what he was, a man who saw an opening and walked through it. The part that broke me was waiting for my daughter and understanding slowly and then all at once that she was not coming. That was the state I was in when I saw her. Diane, 2 houses down. A woman I had met exactly twice. Once while I was helping Brandon rake leaves in September, and once when I had been allowed to sit on the back porch during a Sunday barbecue. She had asked me how I was settling in, and I had said fine, and she had given me the look people give when they do not quite believe you but do not want to press. The garage room had one window that faced the side yard. From that window on clear days, I could see the corner of Diane's back fence. On a Tuesday morning in the second week of December, I was standing at that window because standing was better than lying down, and I saw her walking her dog along the fence line. I opened the window. I said her name twice before she heard me. My voice was not what it used to be. She stopped. The dog stopped. She looked up and squinted through the cold sunlight at the second floor of a garage, where a 63-year-old man was leaning out of a window in December with no coat on. I told her I needed help. I told her I needed to get a message to my son in Portland. I asked her if she would come closer so I could hand her a piece of paper. She did. I dropped the page from my notebook with Marcus's number on it. I told her that if she could just call him and tell him that I needed him, that I was not in immediate danger but that I needed him. I would explain the rest when he arrived. She stood at the fence for a long moment holding that piece of paper. She looked at the house. She looked at the window. She looked back at me. And she nodded once and put the paper in her coat pocket and walked away with her dog. I did not know if she would call. I did not know if she believed me. I did not know if she thought I was a crazy old man or a criminal or a father in trouble. I sat down on the cot and waited. I waited a whole day. I waited a whole night. I waited most of a second day. And I began to think I had imagined the whole exchange, that she had thrown the paper in the trash, that nobody was coming. That this was going to be my life until my heart or my head finally gave out. And then on Wednesday afternoon, I heard a car door slam in the driveway. I heard footsteps on the front porch. I heard the doorbell. I heard voices in the foyer. I heard Brandon's voice first low and controlled saying something about how someone should have called ahead. And then I heard a second voice. A voice I had not heard in person in almost a year. Low, measured. Steady in that way it had always been when he was working very hard not to show how angry he was. My son said he did not need an invitation to see his father. Then the door to the garage opened at the bottom of the stairs. Marcus came up those stairs slowly. He stopped at the top. He looked at the room, the single bulb hanging from the ceiling, the space heater, the mini fridge, the tray with the untouched sandwich from the day before, the empty pill bottle on the crate, the photograph in the sock, the 18 pounds I had lost, the bruise on my forearm from where I had fallen against the shelving unit 2 weeks earlier in the dark reaching for my water bottle. His face went through about 6 different expressions in the space of 3 seconds, and then it went very still. In the way faces go still when a person is deciding something they will not be able to undo. He said, "Dad." I said, "Hey, son." He came and sat down next to me on the cot. He did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "How long has this been going on?" I told him, all of it. The rental account, the power of attorney, the phone, the pills, the tray, the keypad. The window, Diane, every piece of it. I gave him the notebook. He read every page. He did not interrupt me. Every few pages he would stop and breathe slowly through his nose. That was the tell he had when he was working not to say the first thing that came into his head. I had seen that breath 1,000 times when he was 15 years old. When he finished, he closed the notebook. He put it inside his jacket. He kissed me on the top of the head, which he had never done in his adult life, and he stood up and went back down the stairs. I heard the conversation in pieces through the vent because the floor of that garage was old and thin, and voices carried if you stood in the right place. I heard Brandon's voice first, smooth. Managing, explaining. I heard my son ask specific questions in a voice so quiet I had to hold my breath to hear it. What was the name of the bank? What were the account numbers? Did Brandon have documentation for the power of attorney filing? Was Brandon aware of what the term elder financial abuse meant under Ohio revised code? Then I heard Brandon's voice change. Not into anger, into something more like the sound of air leaving a tire. Then I heard Lisa. Then I heard silence. Then Marcus came back up the stairs and he told me to get my things, all of them. Right now, I folded Carol's photograph into the inside pocket of my jacket. I picked up my 2 pairs of jeans and my 4 shirts. I did not look back. Brandon was standing in the kitchen doorway when we came through. Lisa was sitting at the table with her hands folded in front of her the way she used to sit when she was 6 years old and knew she was in trouble. Brandon started to say something. This was a misunderstanding. He had been managing everything responsibly. He could pull up the statements right now on his laptop. My son looked at him and said very quietly, "The next conversation you have is going to be with an attorney and possibly a detective. I would recommend that you stop talking to me right now." Brandon stopped talking. We stayed that night at a hotel in Granville. Marcus called a doctor he knew from college who agreed to see me at 7 the next morning and start me back on my blood pressure medication. Marcus had already looked up 3 elder law attorneys in the Columbus area on the drive in from the airport. The one we sat down with was a woman named Catherine who had been practicing elder law for 22 years. She listened to all of it, the timeline, the notebook, the account numbers. And when I was done, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Mr. Hartwell, what your son-in-law did is not a gray area. Diverting a pension through a power of attorney for personal use is financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult under Ohio law. The housing situation you have just described is a separate and related crime. Do you want to pursue this?" I said yes. What followed was not fast. I want to be honest about that because in the movies these things resolve in a montage. A few phone calls, a tense scene in a courtroom, the credits roll. In real life it took 4 months. Financial records had to be subpoenaed. A forensic accountant spent 6 weeks tracing where every one of my pension deposits had gone. There were 2 long meetings with a detective from the county sheriff's office who specialized in financial crimes against the elderly. Marcus flew back 3 times. He paid for my hotel out of his own pocket until we could get a court order for access to my accounts. And I know what that cost him, and I have never been able to fully find the words for what it meant. The forensic accountant found what I already knew in my gut. Starting in August, Brandon had been redirecting my pension deposits into an account he alone controlled. Over 8 months, he had moved approximately $27,000 of my money out in increments small enough to avoid automatic bank alerts. Some of it had paid down a credit card in his name. Some of it had gone toward a boat he had bought in October. The rental income from my Maplewood house at $1,500 a month for 6 months had gone into the same account and had never come back out. And then there was the paper. In September, while I was still on pain medication from the hip surgery, I had signed what I believed at the time was an update to my homeowner's insurance policy. It was in fact a quitclaim deed transferring my Maplewood property into a trust in Brandon's name. My signature was on it, my signature, my actual signature. I had no memory of signing anything in September except an insurance form. Catherine said this pattern was one of the most common and one of the hardest things to prosecute in elder financial abuse cases, because the signature is real, even when the consent is not. But the notebook helped. The dates I had written down. The conversation in July where I had recorded Brandon's exact words when he had slid the power of attorney across the table. "This just covers the bills while you are laid up, Victor. Nothing changes about what is yours." The distance between those words and the documents that had been filed was, according to Catherine, significant. Brandon was charged in March, 7 counts, including financial exploitation of an elderly or disabled adult, theft, and filing a fraudulent property transfer. Lisa filed for divorce from him 6 weeks after Marcus, and I walked out of that garage. She did not testify for the prosecution. She did not testify for the defense either. She called me on a Tuesday in February and cried on the phone for 20 minutes without saying much of anything. And I sat there holding the receiver and listening because she was my daughter. And some things are more complicated than the simplest version of the story. The sentencing hearing was on a Thursday in April, Overcast, cool. The kind of Ohio spring day that cannot quite decide what it wants to be. Marcus flew in the night before. We had breakfast at a diner near the courthouse. Eggs and coffee, and not a lot of conversation, which was the way we had always been most comfortable with each other. In the courtroom, Brandon sat with his attorney and did not look at me. He was wearing a dark blue suit I did not recognize. He had gotten a haircut. I sat in the second row with my son beside me, and I thought about how much energy it must take to keep up that kind of performance year after year. Always managing. Always presenting the right surface, and I thought it must be an exhausting way to live. The judge read the counts. $31,420 in documented financial loss. 8 months of controlled isolation. Fraudulent transfer of a property valued at $240,000. She said she had read the pre-sentencing report and the victim impact statement I had written. She said she wanted to be very clear that what had occurred in that garage room was not a civil dispute, and it was not a family misunderstanding. It was a crime against a person who had trusted the wrong people at a vulnerable moment in his life, and the law existed for precisely this reason. Brandon received 30 months at a minimum security facility. He was ordered to pay full restitution. The quit-claim deed was voided. My house was returned to my name. His financial licenses were revoked. When the gavel came down, my son put his hand on my shoulder. He did not say anything. He did not need to. I want to tell you about the drive back from the courthouse because it is the part of this story I think about most. Marcus drove. I sat in the passenger seat and watched Ohio go past the window. The flat fields, the gray sky starting to break open in the west. A hawk circling something in the middle distance I could not see. We had been driving about 20 minutes when Marcus said, "Do you know what I kept thinking about the whole time? That Sunday when you taught me how to balance a checkbook. I was 13. You sat me down at the kitchen table with a paper ledger. Not a spreadsheet, a paper ledger. And you spent 2 hours explaining to me why it mattered to know where every dollar went." I remembered that afternoon. I also remembered that Marcus had been furious about it at the time and had complained that his friends were outside playing without him. I told him so. He smiled. He said it was the most boring afternoon of my childhood, but I never forgot it. We were quiet for a long time after that. Then I said what I had been trying to find words for since the morning in the hotel. Since the moment I had heard his voice at the bottom of those stairs and understood for the first time in months that I was going to be all right. I said, "Marcus, I should have called you sooner." I knew something was wrong for months before Diane. I kept thinking I could handle it. I kept thinking it would resolve itself. I kept thinking Lisa would. I stopped. I was trying not to be a burden. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. He did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was very level. He said, "Dad, you spent 18 years making sure I had every single thing I ever needed. You worked double shifts when the furnace went out in February. You drove me to hockey practice at 5 in the morning for 2 straight years, and you never once complained. You are not capable of being a burden to me. The word does not apply to you. It never has. I did not have an answer to that. I looked out at the field. The hawk had landed now on a fence post. It was completely still, watching something in the grass that I could not see from where I was. Marcus said one more thing before we reached the exit. He said if this ever happens again, anything, anywhere close to it, you call me, not when it gets bad enough, not when you have run out of other options. You call me." I told him I would, and I meant it this time. There are things I know now that I did not know a year ago. And I want to say them plainly, because since I started telling this story, the messages I have received from strangers have shown me that I am not the only one who did not know them. A power of attorney is not a transfer of ownership. It does not give the person you name the right to take your money or your property. It gives them the ability to make decisions on your behalf when you cannot, and even then they are legally required to act in your interest, not their own. Using a power of attorney to divert someone's income for personal use is a crime in every state in this country. If you have signed one and you believe it is being misused, you can revoke it at any time as long as you are mentally competent. You do not need permission from the person you named. You can contact an elder law attorney. You can call your state's adult protective services. You can call your local area agency on aging. None of them require you to have money in your pocket first. I did not know any of that when it mattered. I am telling you now because maybe it matters to you, or to your mother, or to your father, or to someone you love who is trying very hard right now to not be a burden to anyone. The tenants in my Maplewood house moved out in May, and I moved back in on the first Saturday of June. The first night I walked through every room slowly. The kitchen where I had made 10,000 breakfasts. The hallway where Marcus's height marks were still penciled on the doorframe. Years of them climbing up, and then stopping in 2004 when he left for college. The back bedroom where Carol had asked me to open the window so she could hear the birds one last time. I opened that window that first night. It was early summer and the light was still in the sky at 9 o'clock, and something was singing in the maple tree in the backyard. I stood there for a long time. I thought about the year I had just lived through. I thought about the 31 years before it. I thought about Carol, who had been gone for 15 years now, but whose absence was still the shape of everything. Then I went to the kitchen and I made a pot of coffee, and I sat down at the table where I had once taught my son to balance a ledger. I got out a new notebook. Not the one Marcus had kept as documentation for the attorney, a brand new one, and I started writing down what I remembered, not the bad parts, the parts that were mine. The year Marcus made the all-county team. The summer Lisa learned to drive in the parking lot of the Methodist church and almost took out the sign twice. The particular quality of Sunday mornings in this house, the light coming in through the east windows, the coffee, the newspaper, the feeling of time being unhurried and being my own. I wrote for about 2 hours. When I was done, I put the notebook on the counter. I went to bed in my own room, under my own roof, and I slept the way I had not slept in nearly a year. There is a thing people say when a story like this ends the way this one has ended. They say that justice was served. I know what they mean, and it is not wrong exactly. Brandon is in a facility in eastern Ohio. My money came back. My house is mine. My son calls on Sundays and sometimes on Wednesdays. And last month he flew in for a weekend just to help me replace the gutters. We spent an entire Saturday on ladders, and we did not talk about any of it, which was its own kind of conversation. But what I have actually learned from this year is not really about justice. What I have learned is that the silence I kept, the suffering I put up with because I was trying not to impose on anyone. That silence did not protect a single person. It did not protect my relationship with my daughter. It did not protect my finances. It did not protect my health. All it did was give somebody else more time to take what was mine. I am 63 years old. I worked for 31 years. I raised 2 children by myself after their mother died. And I did not ask for help then either, and I was proud of that. I still am in some ways, but pride that keeps you from calling your son when you are sleeping in a stranger's garage, hungry. Losing weight, out of medication, that is not the kind of pride worth keeping. If there is one thing I want you to take away from what I have just told you, it is this: call someone. Call them before it gets bad enough. Call them before you have run out of other options. You are not a burden. The people who love you would rather know. The hawk was back on the fence post this morning. I saw it through the kitchen window while I was making coffee, perfectly still against a white sky. Watching something in the field I could not see from where I stood. I watched it for a long time. Then my phone rang, and it was my son, calling on a Wednesday for no particular reason at all. I picked up. We talked for an hour about nothing that mattered, and it was the best hour of my week. Some things you lose and you get back. Some things you lose and they are gone forever. The trick, I think, the thing I am still learning at 63 years old, is knowing which is which, and not waiting so long to reach for the ones you can still hold. If this story reached something in you tonight, if it reminded you of someone you love, or someone you have not called in too long, please do this one thing for me before you close this video. Hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, leave a comment and tell me the name of the person you are going to call this week. Just the first name, that is all. Because somewhere out there tonight there is another Victor sitting on a cot above someone else's garage, trying very hard not to be a burden. Waiting for a phone call from someone who does not know they need to make it yet. Your comment might be the reason someone else picks up the phone tomorrow. Your subscribe keeps stories like this one reaching the people who need to hear them most. And if you have ever been the person on that cot, or if you love someone who might be, I am asking you plainly, Do not wait as long as I did. Pick up the phone tonight, before the light goes out of the sky, and tell them you are still here.